Chapter 6. Schizophrenia, as said before. When the man with a pointed beard in a white coat came out into the waiting room of the famous psychiatric clinic recently built near the river bank on the outskirts of Moscow, it was 1:30 in the morning. 3 attendants kept their eyes unremittingly on Ivan Nikolaevich, who sat on the sofa. The poet Ryukhin was also in there in a state of extreme agitation. The towels which had bound Ivan Nikolaevich lay in a heap on the same sofa. The poet's hands and feet were free. Seeing the man who entered, Ryukhin turned pale, cleared his throat, and said timidly, "How do you do, doctor?" The doctor bowed to Ryukhin, but as he bowed, his eyes were not on Ryukhin, but on Ivan Nikolaevich. The poet sat utterly motionless, with knitted brows and furious face, and did not even stir when the doctor entered. "This doctor," Ryukhin began for some reason in a mysterious whisper, casting apprehensive glances at Ivan Nikolaevich, "is the well-known poet Ivan Homeless. You see, we were afraid it might be delirium tremens." "Did he drink much?" the doctor asked through his teeth. "No, he drank a bit, but not too." "Was he trying to catch cockroaches, rats, devils, or running dogs?" "No," Ryukhin answered with a start. "I saw him yesterday and this morning. He was perfectly well." "And why is he wearing underpants? Did you get him out of bed?" "No, doctor, he came to the restaurant like this." Uh-huh, the doctor said with great satisfaction. "And why the scratches? Was he fighting with anyone?" "He fell off a fence, and then he hit a man in the restaurant and 1 or 2 others." I see, said the doctor, and turning to Ivan, he added, "How do you do?" "Hello, saboteur," Ivan replied loudly with venom. Ryukhin was so embarrassed that he did not dare to look up at the courteous doctor, but the latter was not in the least offended. With a neat, practiced gesture, he took off his glasses, lifted the flaps of his coat, and put the glasses in the back pocket of his trousers. Then he asked Ivan, "How old are you?" "Go to devil, all of you, really!" Ivan cried rudely and turned away. "But why are you angry? Did I say anything unpleasant?" "I'm 23 years old," Ivan broke out excitedly, "and I will lodge a complaint against all of you, and especially you, vermin." He addressed himself separately to Ryukhin. "Why will you complain?" "Because I am a perfectly healthy man, and I was grabbed and brought by force to an insane asylum," Ivan said savagely. Ryukhin looked closely at Ivan and went numb. There was no trace of madness in his eyes. They were no longer wandering, as they had been at Griboyedov's, but bright and lucid, as usual. Good heavens, Ryukhin thought with alarm. But he is really normal. What a mess. Why did we drag him here after all? He's normal, quite normal. Only his face is scratched. You are not in an insane asylum, the doctor said calmly, sitting down on a white stool with a shiny base, but in a hospital where no one will detain you without need. Ivan Nikolaevich looked at him distrustfully, out of the corner of his eye. Nevertheless, he muttered, "Thank God. At least there's one normal man among all these idiots, the worst of whom is this blockhead without a shred of talent, Sashka." Who is this blockhead, Sashka?" the doctor inquired. "This Ryukhin here," Ivan replied, pointing a dirty finger at him. Ryukhin flushed with indignation. "That's what I get instead of thanks," he thought bitterly, "for trying to help him. What a louse." "A typical little kulak in his psychology," Ivan Nikolaevich continued, evidently determined to expose Ryukhin to the end. "And the little kulak who carefully pretends to be proletarian. Take a look at his pious physiognomy and compare it with the ringing verses he concocts. Ha! Just take a look inside him and see what he really thinks. You'll gasp." And Ivan Nikolaevich laughed balefully. Ryukhin was breathing hard. His face was scarlet, and his one thought was that he had warmed a serpent on his breast, that he had taken the trouble to help a man who turned out to be a vicious enemy, and worst of all, nothing could be done about it. How can you argue with a madman? "And why were you brought here?" asked the doctor, after listening attentively to Ivan's accusations. "The devil only knows, the imbeciles. They grabbed me, tied me up with rags, and dragged me off in a truck." May I ask you why you came to the restaurant in nothing but your underwear? There's nothing strange about it, said Ivan. I went to take a swim in Moskva River, and someone filched my clothes and left me this trash. I couldn't have gone naked across Moscow. I put on what was there because I was in a hurry to get to the Griboyedov restaurant. The doctor looked questioningly at Ryukhin, who muttered glumly, That's the name of the restaurant. Ah, said the doctor, and why were you in such a hurry? A business meeting? I'm trying to catch the consultant, answered Ivan Nikolaevich and looked around anxiously. What consultant? Do you know Berlioz? Ivan asked significantly. The composer? Ivan became upset. What composer? Oh, yes. Oh, no. The composer was a namesake of Misha Berlioz. Ryukhin did not feel like saying anything, but he had to explain. Berlioz, the secretary of Massalit, was run over by a streetcar today at the Patriarch's Ponds. Don't babble about things you don't know anything about, Ivan said angrily to Ryukhin. You weren't there. I was. He deliberately got him under the streetcar. Did he push him? Push him. What has that to do with it? Ivan cried, angered at everyone's obtuseness. That kind does not have to push. He can pull such tricks. Just hold on. He knew beforehand that Berlioz would fall under the streetcar. Did anyone else see this consultant? That's the whole trouble. Only Berlioz and myself. I see. And what did you do to catch this murderer? The doctor turned and glanced at the woman in the white coat who sat at a table near the wall. She took out a sheet of paper and began to fill out the blank spaces in its columns. This is what I did. I took a candle in the kitchen. This one? Asked the doctor, pointing at the broken candle lying on the table before the woman next to the icon. Yes, that's it. And what is the icon for? Oh, well, the icon... Ivan blushed. It was the icon that frightened them most of all. He poked a finger at Ryukhin again. But you see, the consultant, let us speak frankly, he's in a league with the evil ones, and it is not so simple to catch him. The attendants for some reason stretched their hands at their sides and did not take their eyes away from Ivan. Oh yes, continued Ivan, he's in with them. This is a fact. He had conversations with Pontius Pilate. Don't look at me like that. I am telling you the truth. He saw everything, the balcony, the palms. In a word, he visited Pontius Pilate. I'll swear to that. Well, well. Well, then, I pinned the icon on my chest and ran. The clock suddenly struck twice. Oh, cried Ivan, getting up from the sofa. 2:00, and I'm wasting time with you here. I'm sorry. Where's the telephone? Well, let him get to the telephone, the doctor told the attendants. Ivan seized the receiver, and the woman in the meantime asked Ryukhin quietly, Is he married? Single, Ryukhin answered, frightened. Member of a trade union? Yes. Militia? Ivan shouted into the phone, Militia! Comrade officer, see that 5 motorcycles with machine guns are sent out at once to catch the foreign consultant. What? Call for me, I'll come with you myself. This is the poet Homeless, calling from the insane asylum. What's your address? Homeless asked the doctor in a whisper, covering the receiver with his hand. Then he shouted again, Are you listening? Hello! Outrageous! Homeless roared and threw the receiver against the wall. Then he turned to the doctor, held out his hand, and said dryly, Goodbye, and turned to go. But wait, where will you go now? The doctor protested, peering into Ivan's eyes. So late at night, and in your underwear. You're not feeling very well. Why not stay with us? Let me pass, Ivan said to the attendants who closed in at the door. Will you or won't you? The poet shouted in a furious voice. Ryukhin shook with fear. The woman pressed a button on the table, and a shiny box with a sealed ampoule leaped into its glass surface. Ah, so, Ivan spoke wildly, looking around him like a beast at bay. Very well, then. Goodbye. And he dived headfirst into the drapery over the window. There was a rather loud crash, but the glass behind the drapery did not even crack. And a moment later, Ivan was struggling desperately in the hands of the attendants. He panted, tried to bite, and screamed, So that's the kind of windows you've put in here. Let go! Let go! The syringe flashed in the doctor's hands. The woman slit the sleeve of the Tolstoy blouse with a single stroke and clutched the poet's arm with unfeminine strength. There was a smell of ether. Ivan drooped in the grip of 4 people, and the skilled doctor used the moment to plunge the needle into Ivan's arm. Ivan withheld a few more seconds, then he was lowered on the sofa. "Bandits!" he yelled and jumped up, but was reinstated on the sofa. As soon as they released him, he jumped again, but a moment later he sat down by himself. He was silent for a while, looking around, somewhat bewildered. Suddenly he yawned and smiled maliciously. "Imprisoned after all," he said, and yawned again. Then suddenly he lay down, put his head upon the pillow, slipped his fist into his cheek like a child, and mumbled sleepily, this time without rancor. "Very well. You'll pay for everything yourselves. I warned you. Now you can do what you want. Right now, I'm interested in Pontius Pilate most of all. Pilate." He closed his eyes. A bath, a separate room, number 117, and a guard to watch him, the doctor ordered, putting on his glasses. Ryukhin started again. The wide door opened noiselessly, and beyond it he could see a corridor illuminated by blue night lights. A couch on rubber wheels rolled out of the corridor. The quieter divan was transferred to it, wheeled into the corridor, and the door closed behind him. "Doctor," the shaken Ryukhin asked in a whisper, "so is he really sick?" "Oh, yes," answered the doctor. "But what is the matter with him?" Ryukhin asked timidly. The weary doctor glanced at Ryukhin and answered listlessly. "Motor and speech excitation, delirium, morbid interpretations. It seems to be a complex case. Schizophrenia, I suppose. Aggravated by alcoholism." Ryukhin understood nothing from the doctor's words, except that Ivan Nikolaevich seemed to be in a bad way. He sighed and asked, "And what is this consultant he kept talking about?" "He must have seen someone who struck his disordered imagination, or it may have been a hallucination." A few minutes later, the truck was taking Ryukhin back to Moscow. It was beginning to dawn. The still burning lights along the highway were now unnecessarily and irritating. The driver, angry over the wasted night, drove at top speed, and the truck skidded at every turn. And now the wood receded, remained far behind, and the river veered off somewhere. A variety of sights rushed out helter-skelter to meet the truck. Fences with sentry boxes, stacks of wood, tremendously high poles, and masts with spools strung on them, piles of rubble, earth slashed with canals. The traveler felt that Moscow was right there, around the corner. In a moment it would pile itself upon him, suck him in. Ryukhin was jolted and thrown in all directions. He sat on some sort of a stump that was constantly trying to slip out from under him. The restaurant towels left by the militiaman and Panteley, who returned earlier by bus, slid all over the floor of the truck. Ryukhin had tried at first to collect them, then he hissed with rage. "To hell with them! Why am I exerting myself like an idiot?" He kicked them away with his foot and did not look at them again. Ryukhin was in a terrible mood. It was clear that his visit to the house of sorrow had left a most painful mark upon him. He tried to understand just what it was that tormented him. The corridor with the blue lamps that stuck in his memory? The thought that there was no greater misfortune in the world than loss of reason? Yes, of course, this too, but what else? The insult. That was it. Yes, the insulting words thrown into his face by homeless, and the worst of it was not that they were insulting, but that they were true. The poet no longer looked to the sides. Staring at the dirty, quivering floor, he began to mutter something, whining and nagging at himself. Yes, poems. He was 32 years old, and really, what next? Was he to go on writing his several poems a year until a ripe old age? Yes, until a ripe old age. And what would these poems bring him? Fame? What nonsense. Don't fool yourself, at least. Fame will never come to the man who writes bad poems. Why are they bad? He spoke the truth. He spoke the truth. Ryukhin flayed himself mercilessly. Thoroughly poisoned by this burst of neurasthenia, the poet swayed, and the floor under him stopped shaking. Ryukhin raised his head and realized that he was long in Moscow, that furthermore the dawn had risen over Moscow, that the cloud overhead was rimmed with gold, that his truck was standing caught in a traffic jam at the turn to the boulevard, and that a metal man stood on a pedestal a step or two away, his head slightly bowed, looking indifferently at the boulevard. A flood of strange ideas rushed through the brain of the afflicted poet. There's an example of real luck, Ryukhin stood up in the truck to his full height and lifted his hand, ready for some reason to attack the cast iron man who was doing no one any harm. Every step he took in his life, everything that happened to him, worked to his benefit, increased his fame. But what did he do? I don't see it. What is so special in his words? The storm and darkness. I don't understand it. He was lucky, just lucky. Ryukhin suddenly concluded with venom and felt the truck stir under him. That white guard fired at him and got him in the hip and assured him of immortality. The column of traffic began to move. Not more than 2 minutes later, the poet, feeling utterly sick and even aged by his experience, stepped on the Gribayev veranda. It was almost empty now. In a corner, several people were finishing their drinks. At the center of this company was a bustling actor Ryukhin knew, wearing an embroidered skull cap with a glass of Abrao in his hand. Archibald Archibaldovich met Ryukhin, burdened with the towels, with an affable smile, and relieved him of the accursed rags. Had he not been so lacerated by his ordeals at the clinic and in the truck, Ryukhin would probably have taken pleasure in describing the events at the hospital and embellishing his story with improvised details. But now he was past such things. Now, after the truck ride, Ryukhin looked at the pirate closely for the first time, and generally unobservant as he was, he realized that although the other asked about homeless and even cried commiseratingly, "Oh no, oh no!" he was in essence totally indifferent to the sick man's fate and did not feel a shred of pity. Right. That's the way to be, Ryukhin thought out with cynical, self-demolishing hatred. And breaking off his story about the schizophrenic, he said, "Archibald Archibaldovich, I could do with a drink." The pirate whispered with an understanding look, "I know, just a moment." And he motioned to the waiter. 15 minutes later, Ryukhin sat huddled in total solitude over a plate of carp, drinking glass after glass of vodka, understanding and admitting to himself that nothing in his life could be repaired anymore, that all he could do was to forget. The poet had wasted his night while others feasted, and now he knew that it could never be recovered. He needed only to raise his face from the lamp to the sky to realize that the night was lost, beyond redemption. The waiters hurriedly pulled the tablecloths off the tables. The tomcats slinking around the veranda had a morning air about them. The day was irresistibly bearing down upon the poet. End of chapter 6.